Hey everyone, this is Ben with BathroomBrewsMTG. On this episode of Bathroom Brews, I'm showcasing something that for some reason many of you have asked for. Blue-White Hate Bears, and the commander for this deck was an easy choice. It's Grand Arbiter Augustine IV. They are a 4 mana, 2 generic, 1 white and 1 blue, for a 2/3 human advisor that says, white spells you cast cost 1 generic less to cast, blue spells you cast cost 1 generic less to cast, and spells your opponents cast cost 1 generic more to cast. Quick rules note, if a spell you control is both blue and white, it costs 2 less to cast with your commander out. For those of you who don't know, the goal of Hate Bears is to slow opponents down by either making their spells cost more to cast, which our commander does, only allowing them to play and or draw 1 card each turn, or having lands or creatures come into play tapped. There are a lot of other taxing effects which we'll get into later on in this video. This is different from stacks, because we aren't stopping people from playing using cards like Smokestack, which is where the term stacks comes from, Stasis or Winter Orb, but instead forcing everyone to play some quote-unquote fair magic. Okay, with all that housekeeping out of the way, let's get into the video. First, let's stop people from tutoring. After all, Commander is 100-card singleton, and the variance is part of the fun. Aven Mind Sensor, Leonin Arbiter, and Mindlock Orb will prevent players from searching their libraries. Leonin Arbiter, however, does allow any player to pay 2 mana to turn off this ability for a turn. But then Demonic Tutor becomes a Diabolic Tutor, and we take those. Next, let's stop those pesky ETBs from creatures. Bye-bye Dockside Extortionist, and hello Hushbringer, Hushwing Griffin, and Tocatli Honor Guard. These cards don't only stop creatures with ETBs, but also any ability that is triggered by a creature entering, such as Impact Tremors, Soul Warden, or the Great Henge. Quick rules note, this doesn't stop cast triggers from cards like Oketra's Monument, Sithis Harvest Hands, or Karametra, just to name a few. Think of it more as the opposite of Panharmonicon. Non-Harmonicon? Anyways, what if our opponents don't play a ton of creatures? Well, then we can slam down cards like Thalia, Guardian of Thraben, Spelltithe Enforcer, and Vryn Wingmare. Spelltithe is even nastier since it makes opponents pay 1 or sacrifice a permanent whenever they cast a spell. And what if they have a ton of mana so they can just pay the 1? Well, that's why we have cards like Eidolon of Rhetoric, Thalia, Heretic Cathar, and Archon of Emeria. These cards force non-basic lands our opponents control to enter tap, only lets players cast 1 spell each turn, or sometimes both. We can slow our opponents down even more. Confounding Conundrum, Containment Priest, and Suppression Field can all be pretty nasty. Confounding Conundrum will punish opponents who are playing land ramp. Containment Priest will exile non-token creatures if they ETB without being cast. So that means any reanimation effects or blink effects while this creature is out are pointless. Since it's a replacement effect, they don't ever actually enter the battlefield, they just get exiled. And finally, Suppression Field. This makes all activated abilities cost 2 more to cast as long as they aren't mana abilities. So we can't use it on cards like Sol Ring, Llanowar Elves, or any Signets, but cards like Sacra Tribe Elder, any Planeswalker abilities, or even fetch lands, you have to pay an additional 2 to activate those abilities. But we can be even meaner. Let's play Drannith Magistrate, Lavinia Azorius Renegade, and Fate Spinner. Drannith will not let opponents play cards from anywhere but their hands, which means they can't cast their commander from the command zone. Lavinia will stop opponents who either ramp with artifacts or treasures, and counters any spell if no mana was spent to cast it. While Fate Spinner makes each opponent pick which phase to skip. These are really mean and I love them. But of course, we need to protect our super friendly creatures. So I've included Selfless Spirit, Arcane Denial, and an Offer You Can't Refuse. All of these cards are cheap ways to protect our board. Their card draw from Arcane Denial and the treasures from an Offer You Can't Refuse aren't as big of a deal in a 4-player game. Plus we're slowing people down anyways, so it's fine. But what if our opponents get 2 ahead on board? How will we ever come back? Great question, audience member. Normally, I wouldn't mention board wipes. However, some of the ones I've included in this deck I think are worth a mention. Dusk to Dawn, Time Wipe, and Austere Command. Dusk to Dawn is great in this deck, since most of our creatures are 2 power or less, and using the Dawn side of the card after we cast it initially, we can get all our creatures back from the graveyard if they have 2 or less power. Time Wipe will let us save our best creature by returning it to our hand before wiping the entire board. Then Austere Command is modal, so we can just pick the 2 modes that hurt us the least. Finally, we need a way to win with this deck. And White-Blue has some of my favorite win conditions. Approach of the Second Sun, once we cast it from our hand a second time, will let us win the game. Azure the Lawbringer and Dreamtrawler are big flying creatures that also are card advantage on a stick. You love to see it. Some of the backup win conditions are Ominous Seas, the Council of 4, and Court of Grace, making us tokens to beat face with. Now let's talk about the upgrades. Obviously, blue staples, such as Cyclonic Rift, Rhystic Study, and Mystic Remora would go great in this deck, as would white staples such as Smothering Tithe, Esper Sentinel, and Teferi's Protection. But those are great cards in pretty much all white and or blue decks. You could add some Teferi's Planeswalkers, such as Teferi Master of Time, Teferi Time Raveler, and Teferi Hero of Dominaria, or some combo win conditions, like Heliod the Suncrowned and Walking Ballista and or Triskelion. I wouldn't for flavor purposes, but that's just me. Do what makes you happy. Thankfully, hate bears tend to be a pretty inexpensive archetype, so unless you want to load up on fast mana, staples, or better lands, I'd say save the money and use it on my Patreon, which you can find in the video description below. Special shout out to my first patron, 3 Raccoons Fighting Over Pizza. Again, spectacular name. If you'd like to continue supporting the channel for free, just give this video a like if you liked it, a dislike if you didn't, leave any feedback or deck suggestions you'd like to see in the comment section below, ring that bell to get notifications when all my videos go live. This has been Ben with BathroomBrewsMTG, and remember, always wash your hands.